You know, while Bill was talking, I was trying to recall a term, I'll use it as a segue to our next panelist. I was trying to recall a term that Tim Vogus had mentioned to us. Tim was one of the speakers in February, and emotional ambivalence was the phrase that he came up with. I was originally like, well, what the hell does that mean? You know, but I really resonated to what he was saying, because he said, of course, you know, it hooks up with Chris Hart's position. Can we not assume that we have good people who are working hard, trying to do the right thing, and somehow or other, organizationally, we let them down? What Tim's point was, what you really want your people to be proud of what they do and to take a sense of pride, so they really do it as to their best abilities, right? But you always want them a little on edge, thinking something might happen, you know, and keeping vigilant to that sort of a concept. So I think kind of Bill's mentioning that made me think of it. I'll use it as a segue to the next panel, which is on safety assurance and management review and continuous improvement. I think we spent a lot of time on this. Mark Hareth and Masood Tahamtani are going to be speaking to us about it. As a regulator, I'm really fond of this section. As much as I can get the industry to look at themselves and continuously improve, so we aren't the engine that's turning that, you know, I think that's in everyone's, including the public's, best interest.
Just so you know, I'm Mark Harris from the Blacksmith Group.
And I am Masood Tahamtani with the Virginia State Corporation Commission. And I'm not used to sharing the stage with someone else. So if it breaks down, Stacy, not my fault. Should I go first?
Yes, go ahead.
All right. Safety first. You're right. You have to be careful. There we go.
We did a job safety analysis here.
The good news is that we're the last two that will talk about the RP. The bad news is that there are 4 others after us. So with that said, as Stacy indicated, this RP talks about the Plan, Do, Check, Act, but emphasizes the safety assurance part of it and has some real good meat to it. Basically, what it means that the operator shall demonstrate that the safety management system that they have is effective and working, reducing risk, and ultimately improving pipeline safety. There are 7 sub-elements to this element. Obviously, there has to be a rigorous, organized audit that examines and decides whether this the safety management system of the company conforms to the RP. And again, the goal is to make sure that risk is reduced and pipeline safety is enhanced. The RP talk about doing this every 3 years at a minimum. It can be done by external resources or internal, but it talks about if you are going to do the internal audit that the same operations section does not conduct audit of themselves. Evaluation obviously is obvious here that you need to evaluate the audit and to make sure that, again, the bottom line is recognized, which is pipeline safety. Reporting, there should be a non-punitive reporting that's in the RP that encourages all levels to report any issues that needs to be addressed so that we don't have cascading issues that end up becoming a catastrophic situation. Bill talked about data quality and analysis of data. Obviously, that's a very important part of this. And finally, performance measurement. I'll go back to safety culture. KPIs have to be established, and the minimum KPIs are defined in the RP for the operators. Now, just a few words on safety culture. I truly appreciate all the previous presenters talking about this subject matter. It's very close to my heart, and I believe, I've said this in the past, and I'll say it again, that this is the glue that's going to make safety management system work. Having said that, you have to have a real understanding of the culture of the company to know whether those efforts, programs, processes, procedures are working. Without a good, strong safety culture, I believe even the best intended procedures may be misdirected. So with that, Mark?
Just to be very candid, when we first talked about safety culture in our group, we struggled with whether or not it was an element, a discrete element of its own that should be among our 10 elements. It would have been 11. Or whether it was a supporting, enabling function that worked alongside of the safety management system. And through Masood's help and sharing what he had done in the state of Virginia, and then we also reached out to, and our operators had perspectives of their own. So we went back and forth on that. And then we, in the course of reaching out to external resources, again, in these high-risk industries and places that had studied highly reliable organizations, we found that evaluation of safety culture was a real key. So we had these foundational elements that we show on the previous slide: policies, operating procedures, a reporting system, lessons learned, all of those. But then, and this concept of evaluating the safety culture is actually discussed in this safety assurance section. One of the things that we realized was there are very tangible things that can be done to evaluate a safety culture. I think many of us got caught up, as we've sensed from commenters. A lot of commenters wrote us and effectively said, this is a pretty mushy topic and we're having trouble getting our hands around it. And so what we did is we reached out, we looked at our internal resources. Masood was a great one. We had a lot of external resources. We spent time looking at the work of Andrew Hopkins and James Reason. And everybody thinks of James Reason with the Swiss cheese model. And it's a really, really important model. But some of his really great work is around this concept of how do you take the concepts of norms and beliefs and the way we do things around here and make them tangible and actionable. And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit here. The first way that you go about evaluating safety culture is evaluating actually perception. And one way to look at it is perception, frankly, at the end of the day, is reality. And a first way to go at that that's discussed in the RP is to use questionnaires. And in fact, there are industry trade groups in this room that have begun to go down this route of looking at safety culture and the perception of their employees and the perception of managers. At another level, once you get some initial feedback from perception questionnaires or surveys, you can drill down into areas and do follow-up in the context of doing very focused and targeted interviews to drill down into areas that warrant additional review and concern. And then finally, at some level, you can look down and bring together focus groups. So bring together groups of employees or slices of employees throughout the entire organization at different managerial and technical levels. So the idea of perception is a really, really important part of this. A second area is this idea of looking at the effectiveness of the culture itself. And so what this really is it's looking at these foundational elements. It's looking at policy, operating procedures, this concept of continuous vigilance and mindfulness. It's being humble, it's being careful. It's looking at a reporting culture and lessons learned, and looking at each of those, and through observations in the workplace, evaluating how effective those really are. And are those having a negative impact on our culture, where they're not being executed properly, where we're deviating from the norm? Some people call this a normalization of deviance. We're deviating away from procedures, as people have talked about earlier today. Follow up on those observations and understand why that's occurring and get to the root of that. At a second level, you can do that more formally through audits. So you can conduct audits that focus again on those specific areas of operating procedures, your reporting culture, reporting processes, lessons learned, and how those are being integrated day in and day out. So I think when we came away at the end of the day, I think our group felt that there were very tangible, definitive things that one can do in looking at the fundamental foundational things that support a safety culture.
To set the stage for few pieces of data I want to share with you is that when I started learning about safety culture and the safety management system, and I looked back at my career, Stacy, for the last 30-some years, and I realized that I'm seeing the same issues in Virginia that I saw 20 years ago. So let's try something here, because we have all the right procedures. We have all the right regulations in Virginia. We are taking enforcement action. So sat with the operators in Virginia, and we said we need to do something. We engaged people at all levels. We had safety stand-downs across Virginia, and approximately 1,000 employees of operators and contractors came to day-long safety stand-downs where the VP of operations stood up and didn't say the same old thing, which was follow the procedure or else. We changed that message. We changed the message for the president of the contractor, the owner, to say it in a different way. We found safety champions within the ranks, brought them up and talked about what it means to do safe work. And then we started showing these people those pictures that we had taken of problems after problems after problems over the last 18 months, and opened up the conversation and said, we want to know why this is happening. And we kicked the executives out of the room. I left the room, and we had somebody that was not, it was one of them to run the system. It was an anonymous survey, speaking of survey, and we asked 12 simple questions. I want to share with you the 5 most telling survey results, if you will. What you're looking at there is we asked, why do you believe that the types of issues we just showed you and discussed with you happen today? And as you can see, both contractor and operator, 50% of them said not following procedures. Another 25%, they said pushed for production. 12% employee attitude. We then asked the question, we said, do you believe that procedures, rules, and regulations are necessary? The same group of people, approximately 90% said always necessary. So you've got a little window here. It is necessary, but 50% don't follow it because there are other problems that we got to try to figure out. We then asked the question, why do you think someone would choose not to report an issue such as a safety issue or not following procedures, doing basically cutting shortcuts? 50%, they said we won't report it. This was about reporting because of the possible negative impact on our coworker. Another 15% said that management will not take action even if we bring it up. What's interesting is that 36% of the contractors fear a regulatory agency, but only 13% of the operators fear a regulatory agency. So I've got more work on my part to do, Stacy. The next question that may be interesting here is, how can we improve safety culture relative to the pipeline construction activities that are within your area of responsibility? 50%, they said, focus on quality and not quantity. This is something we all know. We know that we're pushing people to do more, and as a result, they are not taking the precautions. 12% of the contractors asked for more training. What does that mean? Are they not getting enough training? 15%, they said better quality training. 10% said make us more aware of the consequences of our action when we don't do it right. Finally, the last question, we said, do you believe you have the authority to stop work if pipeline safety is compromised? The good news is that over 80% or so, they said we believe we always do. Another 10%, they said sometimes. So to summarize the safety culture piece with all of this data, I believe that measuring safety culture identifies leading indicators that can allow you to see in the heart of the company and take action to correct so that the holes within the Swiss cheese don't line up and cause a problem. And the assessment is very important because it can truly be a catalyst for transformational change within the company. And Mark, you got the rest of this, I believe.
You're not going to totally cede me the power of the rest of the presentation. You're going to stay with me. You know, one of the other things that's talked about in the safety assurance section that we wanted to drill into a little bit was this concept of assessing maturity. And I can share with you that even though our group went through storming and norming, and as all groups do, we came together, we started to come together. And at some point, as we began to gel on a set of elements, and we had a lot of discussion about what elements and what names and how to characterize them and classify them. But one day there was this sort of revelation that, wow, there's a lot of elements here. And for those of you, frankly, that reviewed this document the first time, you look at that list and you go, that covers a lot. And as somebody said when we were talking at lunch today, there's a lot of work here. There really is. Don't underestimate this. There's a lot of work here. But one of the things, we had DuPont come in at one point, and you know, DuPont has been working around safety management systems for over 25 years. And one of the things they shared with us was their view of this concept of assessing maturity, or a maturity model that actually Stacy referred to first this morning. And it's this idea of recognizing that you're on a journey, that you are not going, implementing a safety management system, improving a safety management system is not a project. It's a journey. It's a continuing effort that you have to dedicate resources to make sure that you're working and improving all of the time. And when the DuPont folks shared this concept with us, this idea of recognizing that initially you'll have minimum compliance, and that compliance is with the standard or a recommended practice in this case of itself, or your own company standard. And then over time you go from being reactive to proactive, and ultimately your goal is to become predictive in the way that they viewed it. And that all the way along, you're trying to really work to reduce incident risk. And so you're looking at developing programs and maturing those programs. And the day that they presented this, when we got done with the presentation, there was a sort of sigh of relief in the room, because I think people really saw that there was a method, there was a view, a context that one could create to step back and say, where am I today and where am I trying to go? And then how can I show, I think Stacy, you pointed this out, not only internally with employees and management, but externally with our stakeholders. How can we show them how we're progressing along? And I think one of the other moments of relief for all of us were the DuPont people said, look, we've got operations today that are still back in that first quadrant. Now, they may be there because we acquired them. They're ones we brought into our fold. We're going through an integration process. But we recognize that we are not out at the edge, and we're never satisfied. We never stop. We continue to push hard to work to get out there towards the end. But we're not there. They said we're not there in any of our operations. And that relates to sort of that mindful humbleness that we talked about early. But this was one of the things, and there's a lot of literature out there. There's a lot of maturity models that have been developed in a variety of industries. It's interesting, if you even look at infrastructure security in our own industry, in the pipeline industry, in a standard that's being developed by operators as well as with NIST, there's actually a concept of maturity model in that document. So maturity models are a great way to show where you are along the journey. And I know it really helped us, and we hope that it'll help those of you first reviewing the document and then going to implement this document, that it is something to help you see a pathway so that it's not so overwhelming from the get-go. We next wanted to talk about the element that relates to management review and continuous improvement. We found this element in many other management systems. It's a critical part of it. At the high level, it makes the tie of what's going on in that pipeline safety management system to management and top management, so they can understand and test what's going on day in and day out. In terms of the document describes how a management review is undertaken, it really starts as its inputs are really the outputs of each of the elements. So if you think about the elements like risk management and operational controls, there's work that's done that relate to each of those. The key outputs of those drive and serve as inputs to the management review process. The other thing that serves as an input or other things are action items that came from the last management review. Those things that were taken away as management expectations to be, or top management expectations to be executed and performed on and brought results back the next year, those become inputs to that next management review. The outputs are needs and desires by top management to make improvements to the process, to recognize opportunities, and in some instances to support what management has proposed. Management may propose, we need additional support in this area, or we need to do work in this area, and we need these resources to do that. The management review is to have the top management look at that and to weigh in and help guide where that goes. This section also talks about continuous improvement and the theme of continuous improvement, which is critical to the things that we do day in and day out. One of the things that this last point is a topic that we all struggled with a bit, and we did not see in other management system standards as explicitly as we felt as though we needed it. We got the very strong sense from the NTSB recommendation in this particular case, in case of Enbridge, but we had seen in other accidents, and I think our PHMSA friends had felt as though they often hear the message, wow, when this incident occurred, we didn't know that technology could do this, or we have now become aware of the technology being able to do something we couldn't foresee at that point in time. And so we built in this concept of having a process to be able to evaluate technology on an ongoing basis. So there's a real commitment to it and a stick-to-itness that makes sure it gets done. Just a few other key points here is that this idea of management review is to make sure that there's a top management review, a connection. Nick, I think, likes to call it a line of sight. It's that idea of being able to look down in the organization and to see the key things that are going on within the pipeline safety management system, that you want that connectiveness to top management. The continuous improvement is an important theme of that, and continuous improvement is an element, as a sub-element even within this section. One of the things that the RP talks about is conducting this on an annual basis, so making it an annual part of your annual review process. You'll actually see that in two places in the document. You'll see it first in top management and the expectations of top management, and you'll see it reinforced again here in the management review section. We talked about how the inputs to the process are the pipeline safety management system elements. The idea is to yield and to really begin to develop a summary of the effectiveness. It's almost like an annual report on the state of the effectiveness of our pipeline safety management system is something to think about when you come out of a management review. And again, this RP does specifically evaluate or recognize that need to evaluate technology. Those are our comments, unless you have anything else to add. Thank you.